Hey y'all, it's Robert, and this week's cake is a 3-tier Halloween cake, and each tier is designed differently using different techniques. So we still got a few more Halloween cakes to go. So for this one to get started, I torted each of the cake layers and then added simple syrup to each. And because this is a 3-tier cake, I have to do this for each tier, but there is one extra step for the top tier. So for the top tier, since I'll be filling it with candy corn, I'm using a circle cutter to remove the centerpiece of each of the cake layers, except for one. The one that's left whole will be the top of the tier. Now I'm going to do the crumb coat for each tier, and this will trap the crumbs to make sure that they don't get to the final layer of frosting, and then I'll start the design for each tier. So for the bottom tier, I'm using Swiss meringue buttercream to coat the cake, and then I'm using a stripe cone to create the indentions because this bottom tier will be a striped cake design. I spent about 15 minutes patching and smoothing these stripes because the cleaner I get them now, the better the stripes will be whenever I add the next color. So now that I have the stripes clean, I'm going to put the cake in the freezer because I want the stripes to be firm before I add the next color. That way they won't bleed into each other. While the cake's freezing, it's snack time, and I know a lot of y'all left bad comments about candy corn, and I don't know why, because they're still top ranked for me for Halloween candy. But anyway, the cake's done now, so now we'll start the next part. Now that the stripes are all firm, I'm now going to add orange buttercream in between each of the indentions, and then I'm going to use a straight comb to smooth the cake out. Okay, so this part can take some time because I want to make sure that the stripes are as clean as possible, but I also don't want to remove too much frosting because I could potentially mess the stripes up, and then I'll have to start the process over again. So now that our bottom tier is done, I'm moving on to the second tier, and for the second tier, I'm going to cover the cake with Swiss meringue buttercream, and then I'm going to freeze it because this tier is going to be covered in black fondant, and I want to make sure that it's firm before the fondant is added. I usually use the paneling method to add it to a cake, but I tried to do it this time by just using one piece of fondant, and it did not work. It started to tear, so I had to remove the entire piece and then start over again doing the method that I should have did in the beginning. So using the paneling method, I covered the top of the cake with black fondant and also the sides, and then I cleaned the seam up as much as I could. So now it's time for the fun part of this cake, and that's by adding the spider webs. So for the spider webs, I just melted marshmallows down in the microwave, and then I used my hands to place them over the cake. And this part can be a little messy, but it's also the funnest part about doing this type of design. So now it's time to do our last tier, and that's the candy corn tier. So once the cake is all stacked, I'm going to fill in the hollowed out center with candy corn. Then using piping bags, I added yellow, orange, and white frosting to the cake, and I smoothed it all out using a scraper. Now that all of our tiers are finally done, it's now time to stack the cake. First, I'm adding straws for support to the bottom 2 tiers, and I'm going to gently place these on top of each other. And I'm trying to get these as centered as much as possible. Now that the cake is all stacked, it's time to add the finishing details. So to finish the middle tier, I'm adding candy eyeballs, and then for the top tier, I'm adding candy corn. So for the bottom tier, I'm making a black chocolate ganache, and I'm using this to drip down the sides of the cake. For the ganache, I'm using half a cup of chocolate chips and half a cup of hot, heavy whipping cream. Once these 2 ingredients are combined, I'm then adding black gel food coloring to finish the ganache and then transferring to a squeeze bottle. So the cake is still pretty cold, so it's going to prevent the drip from going too far down the cake, but it is something that you may have to practice to get just right. And to finish this cake off, I'm adding this tiny Halloween bucket filled with candy to the top of the cake, and that's the cake complete. So that's the cake complete, and honestly, I think that would make a pretty cool Halloween wedding cake, but maybe that's just me. But make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel and comment below any cakes that you want to see me make next. And because this is a three tier. So I'm using a circle cutter. I have to get peppy. You're all I ever wanted. So now it's time to do the last tier. My voice shaky. You're all I ever wanted. Yeah.